90% of the corn, soybeans, and sugar beets grown in the United States are genetically engineered. Yet frozen bioengineered sweet corn may need a label, while soybean oil, corn syrup, and beet sugar from the same engineered crops may carry no disclosure. The difference was not the crop, but whether processing left modified DNA a laboratory could detect. On October 31, 2025, the Ninth Circuit rejected the legal premise behind that system, reopening what Americans may see on grocery shelves. Refining can destroy the evidence without changing an ingredient's origin. In soybean oil production, phosphoric acid pulls DNA into a discarded water fraction. Bleaching at 90 to 110 degrees Celsius follows, then deodorization at 240 to 290 degrees Celsius for over an hour removes remaining fragments. Sugar beet processing uses milk of lime to push the pH between 11.0 and 11.5, precipitating DNA with other impurities. Crystallization produces pure sucrose with zero DNA or protein remaining. So the engineered crop disappeared from both the test and, under USDA rules, the label. Engineered crops, meanwhile, became the American norm. Commercial planting began in 1996, and herbicide-tolerant soybean acreage climbed from 17% in 1997 to 68% by 2001, and 96% by 2025. Corn and cotton exceeded 90% of domestic acres by the 2020s. Canola arrived in 1999, and by 2013, herbicide-tolerant traits covered 95% of 1.3 million harvested acres. Sugar beets entered in 2008, converted 60% of acreage in the first year, and exceeded 99% of 1.2 million harvested acres 5 years later. That meant more than half of domestically produced granulated sugar came from genetically engineered crops. Sugar beets also triggered an early legal warning. The Center for Food Safety and Earth Justice sued the USDA in 2008, arguing that it violated the National Environmental Policy Act by skipping a full environmental impact statement. Seed production in Oregon's Willamette Valley sat near organic Swiss chard and red table beet farms, where cross-pollination could permanently damage organic supplies. A federal court ruled the approval unlawful in 2009. By 2010, it had voided deregulation of a crop supplying nearly half the nation's sugar. Labeling moved more slowly. Since 1990 Tuesday, the FDA had maintained that genetically engineered foods raised no different safety concerns from conventional foods, so no federal label was required. California's Proposition 37 narrowly failed in 2012 after heavy industry opposition, but more than 70 bills soon appeared in 30 state legislatures. Vermont passed Act 120 in May 2014. Food containing more than 0.9% genetically engineered material by weight needed a clear label, with violations costing up to $1,000 per day per product. Manufacturers could separate supply chains for Vermont, withdraw products, or label everything nationwide. Interstate packaging made the first option costly, turning one state's rule into a de facto national mandate. Congress responded with a federal system that replaced the state patchwork. On July 29, 2016, President Obama signed the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard, immediately preempting state labeling laws. Transparency advocates called it the DARK Act, short for Deny Americans the Right to Know. Congress used bioengineered instead of the familiar GMO, and the USDA required that standardized term while rejecting synonymous alternatives. Final regulations arrived in December 2018, with mandatory compliance beginning January 1, 2022. Companies could use on-package text, an official USDA symbol, a QR code paired with a phone number, or a text message system. Critics called the circular green and yellow symbol the smiling sun, saying it resembled pro-biotech advertising rather than neutral disclosure. Exemptions narrowed the rule further. Meat and dairy from animals fed engineered grain did not require disclosure, nor did restaurant food. Manufacturers earning under $2.5 million annually were exempt, and each ingredient could contain up to 5% inadvertent bioengineered material before disclosure applied. Roughly 74% of manufacturers qualified for the revenue exemption alone. The USDA still estimated that more than 94% of total food volume remained covered, but highly refined ingredients created the most visible gap. Digital disclosure created another. A 2017 USDA-commissioned Deloitte study found that 85% of consumers faced severe technical barriers using scanning apps, while only 37% of small retailers offered in-store Wi-Fi. Every observed participant either missed the link or mistook it for marketing. The National Federation of the Blind and other disability advocates called QR codes discriminatory, targeting toward elderly people, rural shoppers, and visually impaired consumers. The disclosure existed, but many shoppers could not reach it. Natural Grocers and the Center for Food Safety challenged both gaps in July 2020. On October 31, 2025, the Ninth Circuit held that the USDA committed legal error by broadly treating not detectable as not contained. A more sensitive test could change an unchanged product's label, exposing the rule's dependence on laboratory limits instead of agricultural origin. The court returned the highly refined food issue to the agency and directed the lower court to consider prospective vacatur of the invalid digital link and text message provisions. It upheld mandatory use of bioengineered. The economic stakes go beyond packaging. Including highly refined ingredients could produce an estimated 80% increase in labeled products. Original USDA estimates placed first-year implementation costs between $570 million and $3.9 billion, followed by $52 million to $118 million annually. Companies avoiding a bioengineered label may need traceable non-GMO ingredients instead of finished product tests. The burden shifts from laboratory detectability to the entire supply chain. Non-GMO soybeans trade at premiums of $2 to $3 per bushel above commodity futures, with identity-preserved beans reaching $4. Standard soy lecithin costs $1,100 to $1,250 per metric ton, compared with $3,000 to $4,500 for non-GMO lecithin. Sugar faces similar pressure, because 95% of the beet crop carries engineered traits, while commercial sugarcane remains overwhelmingly non-GMO. When Vermont's law briefly took effect, Hershey switched from beet sugar to cane sugar to avoid disclosure. A broader requirement could encourage the same substitution nationally. Private certification reveals the price of that choice. Global non-GMO food sales reached $895 billion in 2025 and are projected to exceed $2.6 trillion by 2034. Products carrying the non-GMO Project Butterfly seal generate more than $26 billion in annual North American retail sales. Yet non-GMO products consistently cost 20 to 30% more. Transparency can create an affordability gap between shoppers who can pay that premium and those who cannot. The USDA must now reconsider the standard, and the court identified a quantitative threshold as one path beyond detectability. The process is expected to extend toward 2028, determining how much unintended bioengineered material can remain before disclosure. The United States currently allows up to 5% inadvertent presence per ingredient, while the European Union uses 0.9%. Until replacement rules take effect, manufacturers remain under the existing framework, while the courts and USDA resolve the provisions found unlawful. The label vanishes, not because the crop was never engineered, but because processing destroyed the evidence the rule demanded.